Hello, FSMA friends. My name is Jim Albright, and it is so good to be back with you all today as we do have a very timely topic to tackle supplier accountability. Yep, there's a lot going on within the food and beverage supply chain, and you've seen it from supply shortages to tariffs to changes within the food safety compliance. Yeah, we're going to get into all of it. But before we head in, I want to thank everyone who has joined the series that has been running for more than a decade now. FSMA Friday is a collaboration between the Acheson Group, a global leader in food safety and compliance consulting services, and Safety Chain, the developers of award winning digital plant management solutions that help manufacturers digitize processes and get real time visibility into what's really going on within their plant. FSMA Friday is your all access pass to updates, insights, and guidance around changes within the Food Safety Modernization Act, as well as learning new methods and tools that can help you consistently meet food safety requirements. And the best part is you get a chance to ask your questions to our food safety experts right here. It is the gift that just keeps on giving. All right. Now, as you can see, we've muted all attendee mics, but again, we are leaving room at the end to get your questions answered. And all you have to do is put your questions into the Q&A panel, and we'll do our very best to get through them all. And of course, this presentation is being recorded, so please keep a lookout in your inbox later today as we will be sending you the replay as well as the slides. Now, are you ready to meet today's speaker? Some of you already know him, but it's my pleasure to welcome back Mr. Cameron Prince, who is the Executive Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at the Acheson Group. Cam's 35 years in the industry is, well, let's just call it legendary. He's helped architect the Safe Food for Canadian regulations as a VP of operations for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. He's well versed in multinational food safety requirements and is a certified lead auditor and instructor for FSMA preventive controls. So, bottom line, Cam, we're glad you're here and we have a lot to go over today. So, thanks for getting all of this information ready for us. This is a very hot topic.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
All right, let's look at some of those updates for FSMA.
Okay. I will there's a lot going on with FDA and FSMA right now. And actually, this is a short list there. I could have added other things, but this is getting to be a bit of old news, but I don't think has been on the agenda of FSMA Friday before. So I wanted to mention that the FDA has extended the deadline, which was to be January 1st, 2026, so imminent, by 30 months. And we've heard people say, "Oh, I guess that means that they're just going to drop it and forget about it." Well, I don't think that's what's going to happen. We at TAG are of the view that there is a lot invested in this. It's the benefits are tremendous, and it will come through eventually. There's no secret that there have been a lot of industry struggling with how to implement systems to meet the traceability rule, and I think that's part of the recognition by FDA that some companies need more time to get ready. So it will happen. So that delay is in place. We continue to support companies that are getting ready for the traceability rule. We're involved in what's called the PFT, which is an industry government group that is working on improving and the implementation of the traceability rule. So let us know if you want to participate or have any or need any help with that. Want to mention quickly the appointment of a new FDA commissioner, Dr. Marty Makary. I'm probably butchering that name, but so that we have in place, of course, RFK as the secretary, and now we have a new commissioner, and a lot is happening there. You may have noticed, I'll just add in here that RFK has done a public announcement yesterday, and there is a YouTube video that's kind of handy that he has made that talks about the future of HHS. I had a quick opportunity to go over it this morning. It is very sweeping, and it does mean a reduction from 82,000 to 62,000 employees at FDA. There is a commitment to make that to maintain the science capacity, and most of the cuts, they say, will be in the administrative section. So more to come on that. It is a pretty big impact thing, of course. So we'll watch how that works. It certainly is going to impact the food industry. It's just how. So the next point is kind of related to that, and that is the elimination of grass as we know it, which is and this is the self-affirmed, generally recognized as safe. So many of you all know that many food ingredients, food additives, etc., have been scientifically evaluated by companies, and under the current rules, companies can self-affirm that those are effective, and then FDA does not do an in-depth scientific evaluation of each one. There is what's called a no objection letter that comes with it, but from FDA, but not the traditional FDA review that used to take place. So this was a way to streamline things that goes back to 1997 and before. So RFK has asked the FDA to initiate rulemaking to eliminate that self-affirmed, and that the grass scientific evaluations will have to be evaluated by FSMA. So what is TAG's take on that? Not surprising. I think the concern that we have is that the reason that this system was put in place in the first place was because FDA did not have the capacity to review all of the applications. So this was a way to move things forward. It was argued at the time, and I think is generally true, that the scientific rigor remained, but that no longer is going to be good enough. So how, with the cuts that are coming at FDA, how, if they couldn't do it before, how are they going to do it now? I guess is the simple question. So we'll see where that goes. And another big thing that's happened is the elimination of the National Advisory Committee on Microbiological Criteria for Foods, NACMCF, and the National Advisory Committee on Meat and Poultry Inspection. These were very, very important bodies, and some of the major improvements like HACCP, etc., preventive controls, all went through salmonella controls, all went through these groups. So they were instrumental in bringing strong science to regulatory systems at USDA and FDA. I think TAG sees this as an unfortunate loss to the food safety system. How this will work in future, we're not certain. Certainly David Acheson, our CEO and founder, and Dr. Ruth Bertrand, who's on our team, were both members of these at one time, and their view is that they were extremely valuable. So we'll see where that goes, whether there will be replacements for those that will be equally effective. One would hope so. So those are some regulatory updates. Okay, so for today's topic, Jim and I talked about what we're going to talk about, and this is a really broad topic. So I'll just say ahead of time that I'm going to be touching at pretty high level on the situation we're in now. There's a lot of detail and a lot of things challenging supply chains right now, way beyond what we've had in the past. When I say where are we now, that kind of covers it. But I thought this morning maybe I should have called it tariffs, recalls, and more. Oh my!
I like that one. Okay.
There's a lot going on. Okay, so Jim, if we could move to the next one. There is no question that today in 2025, it's a far more complex environment for supplying foods, ingredients, and packaging. So we've got recent events that are driving changes to supply chains. And I will go through some of those recent events and really paint a picture of why this is true, that the environment is far more complex. Um, and we have to keep in mind that the web of supply chain has been naturally getting more complicated over the years as global trade means foods are coming from all over the world, ingredients are coming from all over the world, additives, packaging. So it's becoming more of an integrated global uh, supply chain, and one little blip in that can really mess things up. And we saw what happened with the Suez Canal, and a few ships couldn't get through for a few weeks, and it was a problem. And the pandemic, when thing supply chains were disrupted. So are we into something that extreme right now? No, it's a little bit different, but there are some things at play that are really going to put pressure on supply chains. Um, and manufacturers and restaurants, also QSRs, are seeking new suppliers because of these changes, and that means that risks are increasing. Um, if you start changing suppliers, not knowing as well who you're dealing with, changing transportation networks, the time to transport may be increased. A lot of things can happen, and then there's fraud. So I'll talk about that. So risk will increase. Um, and even before all of this complexity arose in the last little while, companies have been seeking to improve their supply chain control. So we've seen this in our practice as a trend that it goes back a decade or more, but really intensely in the last few years, that uh, companies are realizing that for a whole bunch of reasons, their supply chains are extremely important. And some large companies have a lot of leverage. They can put some pressure on their suppliers and essentially get what they want to a large extent, but it's not so easy for smaller and medium-sized companies who face challenges in that regard in getting what they need to, from a food safety standpoint, but also from a quality standpoint. Um, so what does all this mean for suppliers? They suppliers are now going to be, if they're not scrambling already, are going to be scrambling a lot more in 2025 as customers are demanding more data, more assurances of food safety and quality. Um, so we're seeing now this is larger companies are dealing with suppliers with, I would say, in some cases, a heavier hand, sometimes a more cooperative approach, but still, it's definitely an increased effort on getting uh, suppliers to provide the assurances that they want. So that is going to be a factor. Um, and then one of the backdrops to this is that the GFSI certification program is strongly supported, and in no question is a, a very important part of the food world. And it needs to continue. It needs to improve, and it really has been a good indicator for evaluating suppliers for many years. The trouble is that we're seeing situations where uh, suppliers, even with very good GFSI certification levels, AA, etc., um, they are still, unfortunately, we're seeing incidents caused by suppliers that do have these qualifications. So, does that mean GFSI certification is not worth anything? Absolutely not. It's very, very important. But the trouble is that uh, GFSI certification is a snapshot. It does not really look at the situation across the whole year and periods of time, and things can go wrong in any food plant. So reliance on GFSI, while strongly encouraged, we have to recognize that this is not enough, and that Industry really has to find new ways and additional ways of providing themselves and their buyers assurances. Okay, Jim, next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about tariffs. When Jim and I started talking about this topic, I couldn't help but say that tariffs are going to be the biggest news in the supply chain world. Um, they mean so many things, and it's extremely complicated. And I am not a trade economic expert, so I'm looking at it strictly from what we're hearing from the industry. Bottom line is what it means is that where food was or ingredients were bought before may not work in the future. It will be too expensive because of tariffs. And also, the products that are produced by manufacturers and supplied by suppliers may be subject to counter tariffs. So not only is it going to be expensive to use some of these traditional supplies, when you make your final product and ship it to another country, it may be subject to an additional tariff that you didn't have before. So the implications are complicated, and we're not here to go into those details. But the reality is, you need to look at your situation and figure out what these tariffs mean. I think in North America, which we're mostly what we're talking about here, with a 25% tariff on everything from Mexico and Canada, some of the foods sourced from there are no longer going to be viable or from a price standpoint. So what will buyers do? They will look for domestic suppliers to supply that demand. So that this is a boon for domestic U.S. suppliers. They're going to get more demand for stuff that comes from other countries that's not available now because of tariffs. Simple enough, but what does that mean? It means that there's going to be a lot of pressure on the system. In order to meet these demands, there's going to be shortcuts taken. There's no question about that. Extra shifts added on, expanded lines. And of course, those things can all create issues with food safety. The other thing that could happen is that there'll be an increased risk of food fraud with substitutions. The industry and many of the less reputable aspects of the food continuum will be looking for ways to get around tariffs and to substitute things to make them look like their domestic production and not subject to tariffs. So that is going to be a complex thing to suss out and figure out if there is fraud in the system. We're just highlighting this as a strong possibility. And then if you can't buy products that are close by, relatively speaking, and you're going from a North American source to, say, an Asian source, the transportation is going to be longer. Knowing what that Asian supplier, what their status in terms of food safety can be a challenge. So just things to think about on what these tariffs are going to mean. And then, as I said already, counter tariffs will reduce some export markets for U.S. companies. So with that happy slide, I'd like to move on, Jim. Okay, so I also said in the beginning, part of the complexity of the world we're in with supply chain are some major incidents that have happened in the last year. We are all heard about the deli meats, some listeria deaths. I don't like to name names, but I think we all know that means boar's head, and there were a lot of implications from that, not only from the unfortunate illnesses and deaths. It also reflected badly on USDA, who were seen as being in the plant, but a lot of questions about the effectiveness. And it's never a good thing when the consuming public begin to have doubts about their inspection systems. And so we need the public to have confidence in the system. Incidents like this don't help. Way back in my career, I lived through one of those with Listeria and Maple Leaf Foods, and CFIA was in there all the time. And there was a lot of questions and a lot of doubts. Fortunately, we were able to keep the system running, and it seems to be that way today. I think there still is a lot of confidence in USDA and FDA, but you have to watch that aspect of it. One of the other things that came out of that incident is that we heard from companies that we work for to help as a consultant. They look at deli meats, and they may be a restaurant chain that supplies a lot of deli sandwiches and heroes and those kinds of things. And um, they, although they were lucky and they didn't use any deli meats from that particular facility, they're realizing, wow, we could have been in a whole lot of trouble, and we would have worn it. And our in our systems to look at those kinds of suppliers aren't adequate. So we've got to get that fixed. So that's one of the things we're hearing. And of course, there was the incident with onions and burgers. That became a real shock. And I think one of the lessons learned for a very large company is that, yes, you may have your suppliers all figured out and they may be strong, but more can be done. And it's this whole idea of secondary and tertiary suppliers, and who is looking at those. So it's, are your suppliers evaluating their suppliers in an adequate way? So that really means more effort to figure out if the controls go through the whole chain. There was another situation that was a large salt company, North American salt company. They had they had some failed screens, and there was a lot of food grade salt went out to the industry, to bakers, to meat processors, etc., widespread throughout the food chain in late in 2024. And the repercussions of that are still being felt because, as you might imagine, lawsuits all over the place, and or potentially all over the place. I don't think they're underway yet, but that's the concern. That means it's a challenge for that company, and a challenge for a lot of other processors that received that food grade salt that had metal in it. And then there was the other incident of a plant-based beverage company that was actually a co-packer for a global dairy company. And there were several deaths from listeria. Again, it was not inspected by CFIA. There was a lot of noise over that, a lot loss in confidence in how CFIA does things. So similar to the Boar's Head, that was beyond the very, very unfortunate deaths of several people. How did this happen, and why was there no inspection taking place? There had been virtually no CFIA visit to the plant for over 2 years, and yet they had a serious listeria problem. So the caption there is, yeah, it could happen to us. So anyway, we'll move on to the next topic, the next slide, Jim. Yeah, I wanted to make the point here that companies are recognizing that having better supplier controls is really important. It does increase safety, so you can't scrimp on it. And the governance of supply chains in corporations, in some cases, needs a hard look, because in some cases there is sort of a conflict of food safety versus access and price. And that's always been there. That I'm not saying anything, but the pendulum is swinging a little bit towards, yeah, the price doesn't matter. We got to make sure it's safe. So we're seeing that in adjusted governance within corporate food safety and supplier control systems. One thing that we've noticed that when you get to the C-suite in a lot of big companies, clearly the bottom line, profits, etc., that's the main focus. That's what they're paid to do. So sometimes it's hard to get that food safety and quality message or priority to that table. And the intentions may be very good, and obviously they do care about food safety because it's fundamental. But getting that priority there, and we've been thinking about this a lot. How can that be done? And we've noticed that a lot of companies they have good food safety. Excuse me, gotta take a drink here. They have pretty good confidence in the food safety aspect of their suppliers, but perhaps the quality is not where it is. And then that affects the marketability of their products and ultimately their return on investment. So this may be a way to make a pretty cogent argument to the C-suite that paying attention to this supply chain aspect of the business is really, really important and can actually expand and improve ROI. The other thing that trend we're seeing is that a more buyer supplier relationship. So a reaching out, an understanding of a common goal of safer food. It's just not, it's moving away from that traditional buyer seller haggling over a price and making sure that just in time deliveries happen and all of that. There's this added dimension of having more of a cooperative relationship. Now, it sounds like Pollyannish, but really it is ultimately the answer if the common goal is recognized of higher quality and safer food between the buyer and the supplier. And we see some pretty good examples of how this could work, particularly with suppliers who are sort of on the higher end of food safety culture, who have worked hard on it and understand how important it is. So it's good for suppliers to recognize that, or for buyers to recognize that in suppliers. So what can companies do to improve their supplier program? So we'll talk a little bit about that for the next few minutes. Thanks, Jim. So how to improve your system? I know this may be pretty basic stuff, but in thinking about this over the last week or so, and going back and looking at FSMA back in 2017, and then noting that recent guidance on supply chains has come out from the FDA in 2024, it's always good not to forget this. FDA has some excellent, not only the rules, but some excellent guidance on how to improve supply chain. So it's good to go back to basics, so to speak, on supply chains. And many of you will know that the Human Foods Preventive Control Rule, the Preventive Controls Qualified Individual Program has been around since FSMA started. And now there is a version 2 of that. And in that version 2, there is a chapter 13, if you want to look it up, that in the slide deck that is used for that version 2 training that really goes over how companies need to approach their supply chain. And just to summarize at a high level, we don't have time to get into it today, but the hazard analysis is really, really important as a fundamental. Are you doing getting a really good hazard analysis of the products that you're buying? And in some cases, you legally need a supply chain program based on who's controlling the risk. And in some cases, the supplier is controlling the risk. In other words, there's a kill step in what the supplier's producing and selling to the buyer. Sometimes a raw material is delivered from a supplier to a manufacturer, and then there's a kill step, and that's where a a supplier control plan really falls mostly on the manufacturer or the buyer. And sometimes it goes out to the customer who has control over the kill step or the final CCP. So and that's for ready to eat foods that need to be cooked, or I mean raw foods that need to be cooked. Um, and supplier control programs require verification. So how do you do that verification? Well, the methods are on-site audits, um, looking at receiving products coming into and being more rigorous about what comes in and what documents come with receiving, doing more testing. We notice that sometimes, particularly um, smaller or medium-sized companies, sometimes it's a challenge to get all of these things in place. So, under the rule, there are on-site audits required where the supplier um, is responsible for controlling the risk. And I think sometimes smaller and medium-sized plants don't have the wherewithal to go on site and check somebody, particularly if they're offshore. So that kind of gets neglected in some cases. Um, and receiving, it's really important that there be a lot of discipline and rigor around receiving of goods, um, checking against specifications, COAs, etc., and then taking the time and spending the money on some testing on some incoming goods. Next, please. Okay, another great tool that's coming into play a lot more, and it's optional. This is not a regulatory requirement, but we encourage this very much is for um, companies to look at the group of suppliers that they have and really look at what are the risks associated with those each and every one of those individual suppliers based on the product they're supplying, based on their effectiveness, their track record, um, their food safety culture. There are a number of parameters that you could apply to this, and there's no one set way to do this kind of risk assessment. We have seen kind of simple matrices that uh, company buyers have put together, and it gives the community of suppliers that they have on a graph and shows really where the higher risk ones are. And when you have that kind of information and you can prioritize who your suppliers are, then it really helps you to spend your money wisely on maximizing the effectiveness of your supplier control program. So, for example, if you are buying sugar, there's not much risk with sugar except for material. If there's a good track record, it's not the same as buying an unpasteurized milk. That's something that, and you have to pasteurize it. There's just two different extremes in the riskiness, inherent riskiness of a product. Um, and then you need to look at the nature of the supplier. If they have a very mature food safety culture, if they have an excellent track record, they have good BR or GFSI records, they have good regulatory records with USDA or FDA. All of those things put together can allow you to have do a judgment on where a particular supplier stands in the risk continuum and can help you prioritize. So, just to mention too, that secondary and tertiary suppliers, I've already mentioned this. Um, in many cases, these are very important contributors to overall food safety. So, it's it's important, and I think we're going to see a lot of expansion in this kind of thinking. And I, I it's going to be a challenge because it's not a simple thing to go that far down the chain. But we've had a few clients asking us to help them expand their controls through to secondary and tertiary suppliers. And of course, that has to be done through their direct suppliers. but it can be also done through research and knowledge of the product that's being produced and where it's coming from. So this is, if you look at the onions that got into the quarter pounders, this is an example of that, where it wasn't known that that was a risk, and where those onions came from turned out to be extremely important. Okay, next. Thank you. Okay. In some ways, some might think this is a bit of a stretch, but ultimately, um, food safety culture plays into this whole picture. And suppliers need to think about this. And this is not, again, not a regulatory thing, but it is something to think about. Now, particularly larger companies have some clout and can, influence suppliers to work on their food safety culture. And many suppliers are self motivated to do so. And there are some excellent companies that are very mature in their food safety culture. I think at a minimum, buyers need to look at suppliers and their overall situation in relation to food safety culture. If possible, encourage them to um, do an internal assessment of where they are, and then build a plan to get on a journey of improvement in their food safety culture. And just this commitment alone is going to improve the levels of risk, and it indicates to you as a buyer that they are committed to producing safe food. And the way to do it is to get them to do a food safety culture assessment. So, next one, Jim. So again, I talked already a bit about this, but there is a standard toolkit already out there for controls and checks. And this starts with supplier audits. And um, we're not, in some instances, you can accept a GFSI audit, and that's great. But if you have a high risk supplier and it's a high risk product, it probably makes sense for your company to either hire somebody to do it or send somebody from your company to go and evaluate that supplier. It just it just makes sense. It can save a lot of money in the long run. It is, in some cases, it's regulatory requirement under FSMA. In other cases, it's just common sense and good business practice. So we think there's going to be more of a push on this, particularly with all the challenges around new suppliers coming on. How do you know? It really helps to go on site and see what's going on. So that's an area that's going to expand. It's expensive. Everybody knows that. Um, and it doesn't have to be on any great frequency, but certainly once a year or every 2 years is probably well worth it for the money to be expended. Um, Specifications. Pardon me if I get on a bit of a soapbox about this one, but uh, we see a lot of companies do not put any thought into the specifications for the products that they're being supplied. Now, that's maybe not fair in many situations, but what we see is that there's a negotiation with a particular supplier. Okay, we're going to produce hot dog buns for you. Uh, and they just say, well, there's no details. There's what color are they supposed to be? How long are they supposed to be? What's the variation? These are quality parameters. And then the health and safety specification or food safety specifications are just simply provided by the supplier and accepted by the buyer without a lot of thought. And I think it's really important, particularly in higher risk products, that companies really think about what the specifications are. If you're buying meat as an ingredient, what is the what pathogens are you concerned about? Um, at what levels? What transportation do you require? Is that being checked? So, refrigeration, freezing, all of these things become extremely important food safety matters. So, um, specifications, I guess, bottom line, I'm saying specifications are really important, and and a lot of thought needs to go into them upfront. Now, companies that have the luxury of a product development group can often have the benefit of being able to develop these in house, but in many cases, companies are just simply accepting the specifications provided by the supplier. Um, Product testing, of course, is important, um, and not product testing that necessarily from the supplier. It may be perfectly good, but it's important to do your own testing at times to be sure. COAs, they can be important too, and the letters of guarantee and that kind of thing are not generally considered to be very strong indicators by FDA, but certainly actual certificates of analysis that show actual levels can be really important. And then the good old fashioned inspection at receiving. Um, Important to keep that up. Next, please. I did mention this already, and we're seeing some large companies working with their suppliers and doing different things, like bringing them together all at once on food safety issues. So putting on webinars, having meetings, emphasizing what are the food safety priorities for that company that's buying these goods, ingredients and packaging. And we've seen really good results from that. We've seen where suppliers really strongly respond to that, and they buy in, and they want to be. They like the idea of being in that, all in it together, and as a community supplying safe food. And it seems to drive suppliers to do better. And the way this can be done is simply through Zoom or Teams meetings with suppliers. um, the buying company, communicating very clearly what their challenges is and what their needs are so that suppliers understand, and then providing webinars on food safety topics, so that there is a dialogue going on, and then opening up other means of communication. So um, it's not, it has been done in the past by a few companies, but we're seeing that this will be more and more a way of doing things. Okay, next slide, please. Um, we're One of the things when I talked about GFSI that need to do more, what comes out of this is how do companies know that the companies they're buying from are doing a good job 24/7 and not just when the GFSI auditor is there. Um, so first off is to encourage suppliers to have strong internal audit programs. And these audit programs need to cover all aspects of the food safety program. And they need to be extended over the course of a year. So um, even if, first of all, there needs to be capacity within a company to do these internal audits. And if it isn't there, to get an outside audit company to help, and to really look long and hard at what's going on in the plant on a daily basis. And then um, really being committed right from the very top in correcting those things. So if things go wrong, there are corrective actions. And we see all too often that corrective actions from internal audits are in a binder somewhere and nobody pays attention, and the corrective actions don't happen. So buyers of suppliers are increasingly going to want a window into internal audits that the company's doing to make sure that they're effective, that they're risk-based. In other words, they pay attention to the most risky things. They don't look at, some corner of a storage area. They spend time on the line more. So risk-based, and that corrective actions are followed up, and that trending is of issues within the plant is tracked and addressed. And probably the most important thing that I didn't add to this bullet on internal audits is that the top people in the company need to be aware of the results of the internal audits. Okay. We will move to the next point, and we're just going to get close to wrapping up here. First off, just to reiterate, we're in a very challenging supply chain control environment. We've got tariffs, we've got supply shortages, we've got new supplier onboarding. All these things are happening now. Because of this, companies need to do more. There are the basic toolkits that have been around for a long time, reaching out to suppliers and supplier engagement, looking at food safety culture, looking at internal audits. And bottom line is everyone's going to have to put more effort into supplier controls going forward because of the challenges that we're facing. Over to you, Jim.
So many challenges, but we got the right team here to figure them out, right? So Cam,
Sorry,
thank you so much. Yeah,
but
and this is a topic that obviously won't be going away anytime soon, and it's good to hear, Cam, from your perspective that companies are paying a lot closer attention to supplier relationships, asking for specific information, and making sure that they're getting that information in a timely manner. But let's go back to the beginning. I'm going to throw up our question slide here, but let's go back to the beginning where you kind of alluded to the cost of, we'll just call it supplier management. So now, with tariffs, it's getting a little bit more expensive, but you made a comment before that price doesn't matter so long as it's safe. And then later on, you were talking about specifications. So if you're buying from a certain supplier, you do have to pay attention that your specifications are being met and just don't go by what the supplier specifications are. So again, I'm thinking about like costs. And as we obviously need to be agile with a lot of the changes that are going on, what kind of advice would you give to say, more like smaller to mid-sized food manufacturers that aren't necessarily able to expend a little bit more to find suppliers or to go through the motions, like you were saying, go on site, do the audit. It's a lot tougher.
yeah, there's no question. I think these companies that maybe have limited resources in that regard, I think first of all, just having a very collaborative internal environment between the food safety regulatory team and the supply chain team, the buyers, and the food safety. That should not be a acrimonious relationship. That should be a very um, positive relationship, and with a common goal of evaluating these suppliers and doing that as efficiently as possible. Of course, as a consultant, I can only say that sometimes it's wise to actually get a consultant to help you with that. If you
Hmm.
can get the right one to help you that knows the industry, that can really help you evaluate or set up programs that are very efficient and cost effective for evaluating suppliers. So there's no easy solution to that. I think too, um, there's a lot of collaborative work just within the food industry. So if a small or medium-sized company can tap into some of the resources that are there, not just consultants, but sometimes other companies are willing to help.
Yeah.
If they've got, so we've seen examples where large companies they're committed to outreach to support others. So that's another way to get help for free, and very good help. So
That's a good point. I know over at TAG there is a new initiative to bring folks from industry together to talk about things like the food traceability rule. And these are just forums, open forums that you can tap into and get information and ask questions. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, this is kind of in the same thread. I'm going to throw this on the stage here so everybody can see. As a supplier, what is the best way to engage with our customers to initiate a partnership, gain insight into how we align with our expectations, and identify areas for improvement?
So this is coming from a supplier perspective, I
It
think.
looks like it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's a good question. I think suppliers are going to be very open to this, and more so going forward. So I think it's good if you can start that dialogue with your customer and say, "Hey, we want to do a good job. We want to meet your expectations. If we need to set up a regular forum to discuss that, if we want to have, say, quarterly outreach calls where we go over how things are going, what may be new in your world, what's new in their world, what are their expectations. I think it's really all about collaboration and dialogue and getting that going. And from there, partnerships will evolve from that. It's got to move forward from just a simple buyer seller. You give me this, you provide this, and I pay you this. It's got to be
Right.
a much richer relationships going forward. And I think this questioner uh, recognizes that. And yeah, just simple outreach and Zoom or Teams calls on a regular basis is a good place to start.
Right. Now, here's from the customer perspective. Where and I know Tiz's question here is around a restaurant chain, but it doesn't have to be a restaurant chain. So you had spoken to a lot of different things, such as your how do you know that your suppliers are evaluating their suppliers? So it's very hard when you're kind of at the end of the supply chain to get all of that consolidated data in front of you to know or verify that everything back even to the lot standpoint has been checked, verified, and is good.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and that is, I think you're going to see a lot of movement um, in this area. And as I said, we've had a very large client ask exactly that to help them work out a program to look at uh, secondary and tertiary suppliers. But if you boil it down to its simplest point, it means that the suppliers have to be able to show to that buyer that they have a very rigorous supply chain control system themselves and that they
Mhm.
are holding their suppliers accountable. And that sometimes gets overlooked, I think. And that's going to be increased emphasis. So it's not just where what is happening in the plant that that's producing the product you're buying is like where did the where did the ingredients come from?
Right.
Are they from some unknown supplier in some country that you have no idea what it is, or is it a USDA inspected facility that's GFSI certified? There's two different things there, and there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on that. And there's also the whole aspect of on farm. It's is that on farm food safety is super important because in a lot of cases when we talk about secondary and tertiary suppliers, we're talking about raw agricultural products in some
Hmm.
cases. So um, what's going on with those, and how can you be assured that those products are good? Now, I think where this is eventually going to lead is that if you're a buyer and you may have to go out to that secondary supplier, ask your supplier, okay, where are you getting this product?
Right.
And we want to go with you out to evaluate that facility if it's worth it. I mean, if it's deemed to be a high risk. So again, I think things are changing in that regard.
Huh. Yeah, it's funny. I'm just monitoring the chat here. Karina was just saying that. Well, I'll just read it here. Their supplier thought that just having a certification was enough, and she had to remind them that it wasn't, and
Yeah,
they had to very right, right. You were
yeah,
talking about
exactly.
this before. Yeah, GFSI recognized certifications, as Cam just said, is a snapshot in time. It's not necessarily ongoing proof that you're abiding by certain compliance standards. All right, looks like we have just a few more questions here, and we just have a few more minutes. So let's see if we can get through them. Regarding internal audits, let's add this to the stage. You recommend to extend it over the course of a year. Do you mean multiple in a year, or constantly monitor and review monitoring records throughout the
Okay.
year?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Now, that maybe wasn't as clear as it should have been. When I say over the course of the year, you don't want to be in the same boat as the GFSI audit, which is 2 days in the course of a year. It's a snapshot. What your internal audit should do is take, well, even the BRC even requires this, that you take slices of your internal audit program and you spread them out over the course of the year. So you cover everything over the course of the year so that you're doing an ongoing monitoring. At all times you're constantly monitoring and reviewing. You can't possibly monitor everything all the time. That's understand.
Mhm.
We understand that. But if you say January, you're going to look at your foreign material control program, and then you're going to look at your recall program and your traceability program in February, and you move through all of the elements of your food safety program and split it out over the course of the year. And then also have some basic ongoing monitoring, but you generally have that with pre-production checks and that kind of stuff. So um, yeah, so that's what I meant by that, is to spread it out over the year to try to get an idea of what's going on throughout the year and not just on a couple of days.
Right. Did you say quarterly internal audits
Uh, you know,
as a recommendation?
I like the idea of what I was just mentioning, is that you split up your food safety program into chunks. And,
Hmm.
easy way to think of it is over 12 months.
Yeah,
And you put out, you take this chunk and you do it this month. And then and by the time you start in January, by the time you get to December, you've covered everything.
right.
I like that approach the best.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just as we're running out of time here, just wrapping it up. So there's a lot of data points that you can be collecting from obviously the information that your supplier is getting if you're able to go on site on a quasi regular basis and do those audits. There's again, you're trying to prioritize suppliers that are um, we'll just say effectively qualified to deliver what you need and hopefully on time. So, Cam, again, thank you so much for spending the time to go over this. There is obviously more evolving in terms of the supply chain and what's going on. But for anybody who wants to explore this a little bit more, there's a lot of resources over at the Acheson Group. If you head to their website at achesongroup.com, you can check those out there. They also have the Tag Talks podcast, which you can also subscribe to and like. We have at safetychain.com a lot of information, a lot of guides, a lot of videos, a lot of resources that you can tap into for anything food safety related. We talked about food safety culture. We work very closely with the experts over at TAG to build these resources to make sure that they are easily digestible and you can send them out to the rest of your team. So again, safetychain.com for more information on those resources. And I want to thank everybody again. This is a very, very good conversation. And Cam, we hope to have you back soon to continue it. I want you to have a great weekend ahead, and we look forward to seeing you on the next FSMA Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.